Hello, everyone. It's Phil Jones from Projector Reviews, and joining me is Jason from Murideo. So, Jason, how are you?
I'm great, Phil. Thank you so much for asking. Thanks for having me. We always have fun here.
So, today we're going to be talking about tools that you can utilize to maximize the performance of any display,
hmm
including a projector. But before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsors, AV Pro and Murideo, for helping me put on this year's Spring Projection Summit, where we talk about all things related to projection. So whether it's a projector, a screen, cables, or but tools you need to maximize your system. So today we're going to be talking about those particular tools. So Jason, can you talk a little bit about Murideo and some of the things that you guys actually manufacture?
Yeah, so Murideo came out of the idea. There was a manufacturer in the olden days that made test and measurement equipment, and they're still around, but they kind of got out of that business. They were purchased, and they sort of refocused a few things, and it left a hole in the market for test equipment. And our CEO, Jeff Murray, him and his son Matt Murray, he's our CTO. They recognized this, and they also recognized the fact that the whole evolution of 4K and HDR and 18 gigs and HDMI 2.0 was right around the corner.
Mhm.
So they said, well, maybe we should just make some test equipment. And it turned out really, really well. And you end up with the Murideo 6G generator, which I know you're very familiar with.
Mhm.
That kind of spun us out of control. It was like, well, we made a generator, now let's make an analyzer. I don't want to say transition, that's the wrong word, but we've gotten to a point now where we're making these field tools for integrators out there in the field and calibrators out there in the field. But we've sort of also started making more lab-based equipment, stuff that you'd see in like a manufacturing facility, and that would be something like the 7G. So we really specialize in like handheld tools and whatnot, but we've really transitioned in the past 3 or 4 years into doing some more manufactured products. And Phil, as you're very well aware of, you see these things from a lot of different manufacturers, and we have a lot of customers like Sound United who use these types of things in their facilities. So we're still doing a lot of test and measurement. That's really kind of our bread and butter here. We're helping the integrators find out problems. We're helping the integrators test signals and really make sure that the backbone of the system is sufficient, really making sure that all the sources are set up correctly, making sure displays are set up correctly, knowing what the correct EDID is, and making sure things are HDCP compliant, and just all those things that are kind of in the background behind the scenes that make the system work, which tends to be some of the geekier, more complex stuff. But at the end of the day, when your end user, your customer hits play on that remote, and that HDR logo pops up and they're watching 4K HDR and their minds are blown by how good it looks, that's what we're aiming for here.
So today we're going to be talking about tools, but also making sure that you have the right tools to be prepared for the future.
Yeah,
And future is, you'll hear it all the time, AK,
yeah.
or 4K at high frame rates. But you had mentioned before that you guys first started off making, there's also the tools. So you have like your tool like the 6G and
hmm
6A, which
hmm
were our analyzer generators, which are used for troubleshooting and
hmm
professional calibration. Then you have little guys like these. These are the Fox and the Hounds.
Yeah.
So these are more of a troubleshooting tool, right?
Yeah, I sort of refer to that kit as the everyday integrator kit. And there are some pretty significant differences between that kit and the 6A, 6G, but it really depends on the application. It depends on what you do in your everyday job. Like, for example, on the 6A, 6G, you can connect it to a PC. There's free software on our website. You can see a lot more detail about things like the EDID. And there's just a little more involvement there. And of course, the 6G hooks up to your favorite calibration software. Regardless of who makes that, we're compatible with all of them, and you can do some really good calibration work, color correction and whatnot on your displays. The Fox and Hound is more like what you said, Phil, is more of a troubleshooting tool. These tools help people get systems set up. That way, when the projector finally arrives and the sources finally arrive and you got your rack all built, you can connect everything. And because you've tested things before all the equipment showed up, it should be, for the most part, plug and play. Of course, there's going to be some little things, firmware updates, and maybe some settings in the source you have to hit, but the hard part's done, and that's the important part for most of the installers, integrators out there, is to save some time.
Yeah, because these little guys have saved me multiple.
I mean,
Um, I use them.
yeah,
I've used these to check HDMI cables. They
yeah,
say that the cable is 18 gigabits and it supports HDR at distances of 100 meters. Well,
right.
they'll send me a cable and I
You
plug in the
test it.
generator and I plug in the analyzer and I can check what
Yeah,
goes in, comes out.
and
Simple, simple as that, right?
And what it's so funny that you mentioned that, because when we do trade shows and we have new customers who are new to this thing, or we have customers who are interested but they don't really get the full extent of what these things can do, that's usually kind of what I start off with is, how do you know your HDMI cables are up for the task of doing 18 or now 48 gigs?
Mhm.
I don't know. So let's test them really quick. It's about a 10-second test, and we'll know the capabilities of that HDMI cable. Or in other cases too, if you're building a big system and you've got 37 HDMI cables in the system, let's test those before they go into the rack and before the rack gets dressed. And because I've been there before. I mean, I was doing installations way before the days of test equipment. And there's been times where I adjust a rack and make it look really good. I'm super happy with everything. Turns out I got a bad cable and I got to tear the whole thing apart again. So a lot of this stuff is preparation for these bigger systems, or even for smaller systems. I mean, let's be real. We have a lot of customers out there who do big distributed systems through big houses and whatnot. And they, a lot of times, they also have a dedicated home theater that's just its own zone in its own room. So the projector, it takes 2 people to climb a ladder and install, and next thing you know, like, the system's not working correctly and you got to climb the ladder again. Why not just take the test equipment, put the analyzer in place of where the projector is going to go eventually, get all your settings and infrastructure and all that stuff sorted out. That way when the projector comes, poke it up into the wall, or the ceiling rather, and you're good.
Okay, so I can tell you a couple of things about these. Like
Yeah,
he had mentioned, check your stuff, especially with
yeah,
HDR, because there's
especially.
all sorts of EDID and HCCP and all that stuff. One bad cable can just make the whole system not function properly. So you want to save time troubleshooting. This is a great tool, and the junior guy can sit
Hmm.
there, the lowest paid guy in your store,
Yeah,
or your kid can sit there and check all of your cables before you take the entire weekend, as a
right.
do-it-yourselfer, to put all this stuff in the walls, or before you roll a truck,
Yeah.
to put all this stuff inside of a building. So
Well,
these little guys are great.
and again, I'll mention this again because I grew up in the olden days. It's funny I say that now, but I grew up in those days where I was, oh, man, what was going on here? So I take the Blu-ray player out of the rack. I climb the ladder with the Blu-ray player in one hand. I try to plug it into the projector and try to troubleshoot that way, bypassing all the components in between and that kind of stuff. So yeah, this is common, Phil. Like, people run into jobs, or problems at jobs rather. I get called out to a few of them here and there. Being in Florida, our housing market's crazy right now, and people are building big systems and yada yada yada. So I'll get called out to a job from an integrator. They're like, "Man, we've been fighting this thing for 6 hours one day, 5 hours another day, and we're just sick of it, right?"
Uh-huh.
So I show up to the job site. I've got my Fox and Hound kit, and I've got an HD-based t-test kit, which I think we'll talk about later. I have
Mhm.
all that in one case, and in that
Mhm.
one case that's in one hand, we can find out most of these problems in not a lot of time.
Exactly.
And also, to your point too, Phil, if you want to hold those up again or maybe show the graphic again, these tools are made for the everyday integrator. They're not made for engineers. So you notice on the front of each piece there, the generator and the analyzer, there's nice big buttons. They're clearly labeled. You press one button for 4K, you press another button for 1080, you press another button to toggle HDCP versions and even to turn it off if you need to, one button on the analyzer for cable test, and you kind of get the point here is that it's a very, very simple kit to use. Now, the thing that's interesting, and I do have to talk about this a lot too, the kit doesn't tell you what's wrong. The kit doesn't say your output of your Blu-ray player is set up incorrectly. The
Mhm.
kit gives you a bunch of information that
Mhm.
you now have to sit there and figure out, well, why is the Blu-ray player only outputting 1080p? Because you see
Mhm.
on your analyzer, it's coming out 1080p.
Mhm.
So it's not like a OBD reader in your car where you plug it in and it says, this code means this sensor. It's not a magical piece, if you will, but with the data that you see coming into the analyzer, or the data you see going into something with the generator, as you said, you knew signal was coming through the receiver because you were generating on one end, through the receiver, analyzing on the other end. So you
Yeah.
knew that those cables and that receiver weren't causing the problem. I'll take a troubleshooting call from an integrator, for example, and they'll say, "Oh, I'm not getting a picture, or the picture's wrong, or I'm not getting HDR and I don't know what's going on." One of the first questions I ask is, "What's the EDID of the display you're plugged into?" And
Mhm.
sometimes they go, "Huh?" So I think what we should do, Phil, is maybe just take a step back, and for anybody who's watching this, let's just talk really quickly about EDID, because it's so essential to what we do, especially because we're still in this sort of transition. Actually, it's kind of interesting right now because we're in almost 2 transition periods at once, right? We're going 1080 to 4K, 4K to 8K. and the 18 gigs to 48 gigs. So we're having these situations now where we have systems that might have 6 TVs in the system. 1 or 2 are 1080p, it's a kitchen or an outdoor TV, 1 or 2 are 4K, and maybe one's 8K or whatever. So the EDID lives in the display, right? And the EDID says, hi, next thing in line, could be a source, could be an AVR, could be whatever. The display says, hey, Mr. Next thing that's in the line, here's what my capabilities are, and here's what you should send me. And the source, or whatever's next, should say, oh, cool, I see you there, and I see that you're telling me to send you this, so I'm gonna send you this. So the point is, if the EDID on the TV is not set up for 18 gigs, guess what it's gonna tell the next device in the system? Hey, don't send me 18 gigs. So on the Sony TVs and on the LG TVs, on a lot of projectors, a lot of receivers, you have to change the input to some sort of, and they're all different, of course, enhanced format, deep color, you know, they're all different things. But you can take the analyzer and you can read the EDID of the display that it's plugged into, and you can tell right away what the display wants. So now you know how to set up your sources, or now you know how to reconfigure display. And it's confusing too, right? Because a lot of products, you might have 3 or 4 inputs, but maybe only 1 or 2 of them are good for 18 gigs. And now we're seeing that same scenario with 8K. The thing's got 4 inputs, only one of them's 8K. You plug into the wrong input, there's no EDID there for 8K, and you never get 8K.
And like you said, this also applies to other pieces besides the displays. So for example, if you have a receiver in line, those receivers have the ability to change the EDID from standard, which is 10 gigabits per second, to enhanced, which is 18 gigabits per second, all the way up to 8K enhanced, which could be up to 40 on most AVR gigabits per second. And when you go from, by the way, also when you go from 4K enhanced to 8K enhanced, you're changing even the communication from TMDS to FRL. So all of that stuff you could read from on these particular devices.
Yeah, and I'm super glad you mentioned that, because I was thinking the same thing. So with HDMI 2.1, we go from 3 data lines TMDS to 4 data lines FRL, fixed rate link. So here's the interesting, it's kind of a double-edged sword because it's good and it's bad. If you had an 18 gig TMDS system and something in the system was maybe a cable's not 18 gigs, for example, you'll get no picture, right? Now you got to trace it and figure out what's going on. The interesting thing about HDMI 2.1 and FRL signals is that there's a protocol in there called link training. So think about this for a second. Here's how it works. I have an above 18 gig source, an above 18 gig display, and above 18 gig AVR in the middle. I've got a capable cable going from the source to the AVR, but I have an insufficient cable going from the AVR to the display. So now with FRL, you will get a picture. That's link training, right? That's what it's called. But because that cable can only do, let's just say 1080p, you check the display, guess what it is? It's 1080p. But the point is you have a picture. So what we're teaching integrators now for HDMI 2.1, you're probably going to get a picture every time, unless something is physically broken, bad cable, bad end, broken input on a receiver, yada, yada, yada. Once you get a picture on the screen, you still should hit that info button on the projector remote to see actually what's coming in, because it could be wrong. And the last thing you want to do is have this 4K HDR 8K system set up for a customer and they're not getting what they paid for.
And he's watching HD on it. And like I said, the analyzer provides you with a ton of information about what type of HDCP, what type of audio is going through it, what's the bandwidth. All of the information can actually be read on this particular device.
If you see the third line down, it says type, and then it says FRL 4 lanes 10 gigs. So we know that that's a 40 gig signal coming in. If this were an 18 or less signal and it was TMDS, it would tell you on that type line, TMDS. Right. So you can plug the analyzer in to where the projector would normally go, and you can see what's coming into the projector to make sure that everything before the projector is set up correctly. So
the other thing too is these support signals up to 40, correct?
40, yes, 40.
Now people go, oh, it's supposed to, the signal should go up to 48. Most of the source, most of the displays and most of the AVRs and stuff, the inputs only are 40 anyway, which is far exceeds the capability of most displays. I can't think of very many that have 12 true 12-bit panels in them.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to make sure your system is optimized with
There,
40.
there's one I can think of, and it was LG's first um, over 18 gig HDMI 2.1 display, and those did a full 48. And
Mhm.
the model the next year, which you would expect to still be 48, I mean, we expect these things to get better every year, right? The next year it was only 40. And you
Mhm.
know, as somebody who works for a manufacturer and you deal with this a lot, the difference in price between that chip and the 48 gig chip, which are really
Is the
hard to get right now anyway, we don't want that handheld tool to be $10,000. And
exactly.
I'm a little exaggerating there a little bit probably, but we're trying to keep these things at a specific price point. And guess
Mhm.
what? There are no signals right now over 40 gigs. When
Mhm.
that does happen years from now, we'll redesign this thing and we'll have
Yeah.
448 gigs.
Now moving up. So we talked about the fact that you had the little guys,
Yeah.
the Fox and the Hounds.
Yep.
Then we moved up to something like a 6A, 6G. You
Right.
guys have those, but then
Correct.
we have tools that even provide even more information because
Yes.
professionals want even more, and
Right.
that's where this guy comes in, right?
Hmm.
What is this?
So that's the 7G. That's what I mentioned at the beginning of the video. That is more of a manufacturer tool. It's more of a lab tool. There's no battery in it, so you have to plug it in for power. It's, as you can see in your hands there, Phil, it's like much bigger, right? But like,
Yeah.
think about the everyday installer. They don't necessarily need to know the latency of the eARC channel of a TV. Like an
Hmm.
installer wouldn't need to know that, but a manufacturer will. If they get bad numbers, and you know as well as anybody, there's this whole like race right now for lower latency, lower latency, lower latency. So if I'm a manufacturer and I measure my latency and it's too high, I can go back to the engineers and say, hey guys, our latency is too high. We need to redo this, and we need to be able to keep up with these other manufacturers, so we
Hmm.
stay relevant and people buy our stuff. So this
Hmm.
is a good tool to give the manufacturers and the engineers a lot of different feedback
Hmm.
on how they're building their devices. Now the other thing too, I would never tell you as an installer or a calibrator not to use this, because this also does connect to all your favorite calibration software packages. But there's
Hmm.
like, I forget the exact number, but there's like 1,100 test patterns in here. You can even
Hmm.
upload your own reference images if you want to. It has built-in video clips from our friends at Spicy Pixels, Stacy Spears and Tyler Pruitt and those guys. And there's some 120 frames per second content in there, so you can make sure your system's compliant with 120. So there
Hmm.
are a lot of things in there that you could use this for as a calibrator or an integrator. But
Hmm.
really, to be honest, though, the main focus of this was
Yeah.
what was aimed at the manufacturing side of things.
Yeah, and this is a very, very
It's very
powerful tool.
capable.
That I use this now when I calibrate projectors because it's got the patterns and it works
Yeah,
perfectly with Cowman.
right.
And so I can use this instead of I use this instead of my 6G, so I
Sure.
can use this calibration, right?
Yep. Yep.
We do test things such as latency here because
Yeah.
if you look at
Right.
projectors now, they're like, oh, this thing does 16 the response time is
Yeah.
16 milliseconds at 4K 60 and only 8 milliseconds at HD 120.
Right.
Well,
Right.
I could check it with
Now
this.
you know.
Oh, by the
Yep.
way, the reason why I learned that was from my man Jason over there
Oh,
because
the the
I had
latency
this
thing.
and I was telling them, oh, I have the old Leo Bonar
Yeah.
test pattern that would read up to HD at 60 frames per second. But
Which,
we're
by the
getting all
way,
of these. Go ahead. It's a
by the
great piece.
way, that's a great piece. It's handheld. It's easy. It's a great
Oh,
piece.
I love the piece, but it didn't read high enough. And then I
Yeah.
was like, okay, I'm gonna go out and buy their 4K
Hmm.
version
Yeah.
to check at higher. And he
Right.
goes,
Why
you
not
know,
just use? Why not just
it's
use
built
that?
into here. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? He goes, look at the back of the thing.
Yeah.
And I go,
There's
what
a
do you mean?
microphone and a.
He goes,
Yeah.
you'll notice on the back that it has the ability for sensors. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh yeah. And he's like, well, one of the things you can do is you can check latency,
Yeah.
video and audio latency with this. And
Which,
it's
by the
built
way,
in.
it comes with
Uh-huh.
those sensors too. By the way, those aren't something you have to buy extra. It comes with the
Yeah.
sensors.
They come in the box. And he
Hmm.
goes, and you can just plug it in. And because I have an 8K one, got the
Yeah.
little, couldn't see it on the front of this, there's a little 8K logo that
Yeah.
sits
Right.
right on the front of this guy.
Yep.
And I can go, wow. So now I could
Hmm.
test latency of 8K displays. I can test
Right.
latency of 4K 120, latency
Hmm.
of HD 120, and I can check all those. So when those manufacturers say, that this is the spec. This is the spec. The
Yeah.
other thing too is a lot of times people, hardcore gamers, are people who are buying these things and these expensive PlayStations. And the only reason why you're really buying HDMI 2.1
Mm.
is for variable refresh rate, auto low
Yep.
latency, a lot of stuff that's to
Yep.
do with gaming. So
Yep.
person's, well, I gotta
Very
have this
true.
because I have a PlayStation or Xbox and I
Yeah.
want to play games at 4K 120 and blah 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 blah. And well, what happens when it goes from the all the way from the game system all the way through?
Hmm.
Is that the latency you're getting when
Right.
so you can actually test that
Yeah.
with this. Then you can plug this in the back and then read the projector or the display in the front
Yep.
and say, wow, when I plug it directly into the display, I'm getting 16 milliseconds.
Yeah.
When I run it through my entire system, I'm getting 32 milliseconds.
Yeah.
Something in the mix is not in game mode, or
Yeah.
something in the mix is adding latency, and you could use this to troubleshoot that. So
And the other thing to think about too is that like the folks who are out there reviewing projectors and reviewing flat panels, latency is such a hot topic right now because of exactly your point, Phil. It's the gamers. So, latency right now is like really, really important to these guys. And, there are some great HDMI 2.1 features that are going to help. You mentioned auto low latency mode. There's something called quick frame transport that helps with a lot of this stuff. So, the gaming industry right now is really driving a lot of this stuff. We really don't have any 120 content for film or for video or anything like that. But I will tell you, I've seen 4K 120 a few times, a good handful of times at this point. And dude, I'm not really a gamer at all. Like my last system was a Super Nintendo, but I'm watching these guys play these racing games and first-person shooter games at 4K 120, and I'm going, holy moly! Like maybe I should get back into gaming because this just looks really fun. Variable
exactly.
refresh rate. I do think we'll see variable refresh rate in film, and the reason I say that is because take a movie like Gemini Man. I always use that as an example because it's the best example for 60 frames per second. For all of the scenes that have fire, explosions, smoke, water, things that look fluid anyway, they look awesome at 120. The motorcycle chase scene at the end looks
It's
awesome
epic.
at 120. But when two people are face to face talking to each other, or they're just making very small movements, it does have that weird
Mhm.
too much motion look to it. So if the people making the movie, in this case is Ang Lee, could do those scenes at 24, but then do the action scenes and whatnot at 60 or 120 or whatever, that is going to be really, really cool. And again, we're seeing that in video games. You have the gameplay is maybe 120, the in between levels cinematic little thing they play is 24, maybe 30, maybe 60, and then it's back to 120 when the game fires up again. So this is going to be really, really cool. But to your point, Phil, we're seeing this really driven by the gaming community right now, at
Exactly.
least.
Exactly. And like I
Yeah.
said, eventually you'll start seeing, maybe broadcast sports done in maybe 120
Yes.
live
That's
Olympics or
going to
the
be
Super
awesome.
Bowl or something like that.
That's
And
going to be
and this
awesome.
just helps you make sure that you're future ready. All
Right.
of this is, I like to say, buy once, cry once for many customers.
I
So
like that. Might steal it.
you're convincing yourself as a customer, or you as a
Right.
dealer, you're trying to talk to a customer to make sure that they spend their money wisely, to make
Hmm.
sure that they're prepared for the future as long as possible, and
Right.
being able to make sure that the system is responsive and that
Yep.
the system can handle the load. So even though the AVR that they're using right now or the TV that they're using right now does not have the capabilities, why not make sure that everything until you get to that one
Right.
limiting source can support it? And
Yeah.
then when you swap that piece out, you're good to go. You don't
Right.
want later to find out that the cables you chose were the wrong ones, or
Right.
later to find out that the receiver was set in the wrong mode, or later to find out the balance don't work, or later to
Hmm.
find out that your display is not in game mode. You just want to
Hmm.
say, oh, now it's time to get a new TV, and I
Yeah.
plug it in, and magical mystical, it actually
Right.
works.
Well,
So this
it
helps you prepare for the future.
every system that's built, I don't care how good the room is, I don't care how good the components are, there are always some compromises you have to make in the system design, and that's just how it works. So, we want to compromise less. We don't want to compromise if we don't have to, but you need the test tools to figure out what you can compromise and what's really not good to compromise. I'll give you a good example. One of my favorite pieces on the planet right now is the MadVR NV processor for video. We see it on a lot of projectors. It is a really, really sweet piece. The MadVR is a very simple one input, one output because it's supposed to be the last thing in the signal chain before the projector, before the display. But they admittedly know that if you're doing gaming, that you're going to introduce some lag when you run through the processor, because the processor is very powerful. It's doing a lot of work. So what do? They have a pass-through mode as another input on the MAD-VR. So it's bypassing all that processing. That's what you plug the gaming system into. But those guys, as a manufacturer, need to know this stuff. And they need to be able to measure it and quantify it and give real numbers. And they can't do that without things like the 7G.
Exactly. Now, we don't have time to talk about all of the stuff,
Oh,
but you
no way.
have
We'd be here for
testing
days.
equipment to test HD base T, right?
Yes.
That you
Yes.
introduced last year that we talked about. And
Yep.
I'll put a link to that video down
Hmm.
below where you could
Great piece.
actually check that out if you want to check
Yeah.
out some of the other offerings. So there's ways you could check HD base T. There's ways you can use these tools for troubleshooting. We did a session a little while back about calibration, how you use
Yeah.
these tools for calibration.
Yep.
And Jason actually went through tips. So if you don't have all of these tools, how do you utilize test patterns that are
Still a lot.
available on their website to optimize the performance of your display? So
Yep.
we don't have time to talk about all that, but
Right.
we
Right.
always want to have Murideo come and talk to us about their solutions because
Hmm.
they're there to help you, whether you're a
Hmm.
consumer or whether you're a dealer, to optimize the performance of your gear, the
Right.
gear either you own or the gear that you're selling. So
Yep.
whether you're looking for a more compact, just troubleshooting solution that can
Hmm.
go into a bag, they have those. Whether you're
Yeah.
looking for something, if you're a calibrator or a geek like me and you want to calibrate TVs and displays, they have
Yeah.
something like the 6As and 6Gs, and
Right.
all the way up to troubleshooting tools if you are a professional, a manufacturer, or even a
Hmm.
professional reviewer who needs a lot more data to
Right.
check to make sure the manufacturers are actually doing what they're saying they're doing.
Yep.
They have solutions for that. So,
Oh yeah.
Jason, is there any other points that you would like to cover before we let these guys go?
No, I mean, listen, man, it part of being a professional, I don't care what the profession is having the right tools, knowing how to use them, saving time, improving your margins. I mean, I've heard numbers these days. When I was in the field doing install work, it was about $150 to roll a truck for a troubleshoot where you're not going to be bringing in any income. And
Mhm,
I've heard numbers these days up to like $350.
mhm,
So if you're an integrator out there, you can show up to a job site, you can have let's just say the Fox and Hound and the HD-based T tester. Like, what else do you need, right? You can test cables, you can test the HD-based T lines, you can see what's coming out of your sources and receivers, and everything that has an input has an EDID, so you want to be able to read all the EDIDs of all the different components in the signal chain. And
mhm.
I'm beating a dead horse here, but having the right tools saves you a whole lot of headache and a whole lot of time. So that's really what it comes down to, is being easy to use, saving you guys a headache.
Exactly. So like I said, we can't talk about all of the things
Yeah.
that they offer in their lineup, but
Yeah.
they actually have a very good YouTube channel that
Hmm.
Jason takes care of.
Yep. Yep.
And
Yep.
we go into hyper detail about tips to calibrate your displays. There's
Yeah.
test patterns that you can use to check
Right.
the video quality. There's interviews with all sorts of industry experts, and then
Hmm.
he also walks you through the tools. So if you end up purchasing one of their tools, how do I best utilize it? So
Yeah.
if you have not subscribed to Merideo's YouTube channel, make sure that you like and subscribe to the Murideo YouTube channel. And by the way, make sure that you like and subscribe to Projector Reviews, our YouTube channel as well, because we're trying our best to bring you more information to help it make it easier for you to install and optimize your systems. So make sure that you check those out. So Jason, thank you very much for coming and talking to us again about your
Anytime.
tools. Because each time we talk, I have another personal experience about
Yeah.
utilizing your tools
Right.
to get me out of a jam. And every time we talk, I really have to come back and say thank you about those
Anytime,
tools.
man. That's you hit the nail on the head, man. We're here to help people. Everybody who works with us has have some sort of background and some sort of installation, and also too, I'll mention this as kind of my last note here. We, whether it's on the AV Pro side or the Murideo side, we value the feedback from the users very, very much. And there has been so many different things where a user will say, you know, man, this thing is great, but I wish it did this.
Mhm,
Okay, that's actually a really good idea. We never thought of that. So the
mhm.
next revision comes out, the next firmware comes out, and we continually add things. So, you know, don't be shy if there's something that you want to see, whether it's a brand new product or an upgraded feature on a current product. Please let us know. My email, very easy to find, jason@murideo.com. You can also do info@murideo.com to get a hold of any of us. There's 3 people on the team, so one of us will get to your question or your feedback pretty quickly. So just keep that in mind, guys. If you want to see some cool new features or cool new capabilities, let us know. We build this stuff for you guys, so don't be shy.
Okay, so thank you for coming, and
Anytime, Phil.
hopefully everybody out there has learned a little bit about the cool tools that are manufactured by Murideo. So take care, everyone, and we will talk to you soon.